He knows that when you come into government, you don't have much time if you're going to make very difficult decisions, if you're going to come and make a very tough budget. He needs to make it this one. He's saying in trying to use the political cover that I have to do it this year, I have to balance the books. But he knows that he's just not got that much time before people start going, well, you've been in power for a long time.
Well,
now.
You're the second political editor I've heard say this in the last week. I think Laura Kuenssberg wrote an article about it. Was I hallucinating when Greg Clark, as chairman of the Conservative Party, spent most of the election campaign referring back to Liam Byrne's note from 2010 about there not being any money left?
And Greg Hands, the Conservative Party chairman. Yeah.
And Rishi Sunak raised it at PMQs after the election. No, I beg your pardon, just before the last election. So they were harking on to a global financial crisis being somehow Labour's fault 14 years after they came to power.
I fully expect that Keir Starmer is going to use this.
That Labour should stop talking about a Conservative-created financial hole 6 weeks after the election is a little unfair.
I completely agree with you. But I think that there is going to be a point where people will say, look, this is the decisions that you're making and you need to be held to account for the decisions that you're making. But yes, in terms of the economics, this is something that Keir Starmer is going to be able to make. And, I know it's really early to be thinking about the next general election into the next term, but David Cameron and George Osborne made that a really key part of their re-election campaign in 2015. It worked for them. They managed to boot out the Liberal Democrats from the coalition and managed to make a really, really successful second term for them by essentially still blaming the last government. So I imagine that this is going to be a theme that Keir Starmer is going to continue to bash again and again, because I think that he thinks that it resonates with people. After 14 years of Conservative rule, he is going to say, it's going to take me some time to sort through this and sort it all out. Let me get under the bonnet. Let me have a look at this public finances. It's way worse than we thought. And we heard him talking about that at the TUC earlier this week when he made that speech to them. For the first time, a Labour Prime Minister making that address since Gordon Brown. And he was talking about things like social care as well. He's talking about things like the NHS, and we'll be hearing a lot more about that tomorrow with Lord Darcy's report into the quite dire state of the NHS. We expect him to come back and say, and Keir Starmer is going to argue that things are so bad, it's going to take me some time to get under the bonnet and fix them.
I used the phrase, I may even have coined the phrase, front pageophobia yesterday, and it's hard to think of a government that didn't operate in fear of the newspapers, in fear of newspaper front pages. Boris Johnson reportedly, it's according to Dominic Cummings, so make of it what you will, was more concerned about how his latest behaviour would be reported in the Daily Mail and the Daily Telegraph, his current and former employers, than he was about anything else, including his parliamentary colleagues. If Keir Starmer doesn't suffer from front pageophobia, then you, and to a lesser extent I, as journalists who cover politics, are going to be veering into relatively uncharted waters.
I think all prime ministers care about what's on the front pages of their newspapers.
It's a question of how much
they know. How
care.
many papers, and how many papers are still, sold in across the UK and put in, petrol stations and WH Smiths and whatever it might be. They know that. But, I think for him...
But Starmer also, let me clarify my question. Starmer also knows, referencing Ed Davies' question a moment ago about cancer, he also knows that people at the Daily Mail are going to write headlines like cancer deaths set to soar 17% over the next 5 years under Labour, Charity warned. So Charity is warning that the consequences of the last government mean that cancer deaths are likely to soar in the next 5 years.
Between
and
a rock
the
and
Daily
a hard
Mail
place
turn
here,
it into a Labour headline. So because he is a Labour leader, and almost all of Fleet Street is dedicated to supporting the Tory movement, some of it, of course, now Farage, Starmer isn't going to govern with the lips of Paul Dacre or whatever his modern equivalent.
Definitely not in the same way. Definitely not in the same way.
It's going to be
different. It's going to be different. And obviously, you've seen a slew of front pages today talking about prisons, and
which he knew would happen.
He knew would happen, and he decided to make that decision anyway, knowing that that's going to be on the front page of every national newspaper.
Sunak bottled it, even when he was told to do it.
This was a decision that Rishi Sunak didn't take
because of
and
these
didn't
front
want
pages.
To take. I don't think this is the entire reason.
Election.
Yeah, I don't think he. I think actually doing such a thing during an election campaign would have been fraught with risk from whichever side you come at it from. But yes, Starmer's decided to take this decision. It's very clear that he's willing to be unpopular. he has the political mandate to be able to do so. He has the numbers in the House of Commons. It doesn't matter that 52 Labour MPs abstained yesterday on the winter fuel payment. Obviously, yeah, like I say, things are going to get worse for him. But it's a risk that he can afford to take because of the power that he's got, because of the numbers in the House of Commons that he's got, and because we are just a few months out from that election. Now is the time he has to strike while the iron's hot, or he's not going to get anything done for the next 5 years.
And very nicely put. And then the stuff about farming. I
think Rishi Sunak has showed us that he is now very much on the route back to the backbenches, isn't he? Yes. This is something that it's British Farming Day today, which is why all the MPs in the House of Commons are wearing this sort of wheat tucked into many of their lapels. And these kind of this is usually something that a backbencher would stand up and say, is the Prime Minister going to look at the NFU's idea to enshrine a target for food security in our laws? That is something you do not expect to come from the leader of the opposition's mouth. Let's not forget Rishi Sunak has a very rural constituency up in Richmond, and I imagine he might be trying to use the last PMQs that he has available to him in his slot to maybe raise some of the issues that some of his constituents might want him to. A cynic might say that.
Well, yeah. And of course, it also begs the question of why the prisons story wasn't raised by Rishi Sunak, possibly, as we suggested beforehand, because he'd be hit immediately over the head with the Mark Rowley letter that he completely ignored.
I think, potentially he thought that wasn't a great line to go down on. But like I say, he's spoken about prisons before. He's spoken about overcrowding before. He's spoken about the fact that the Labour Party want to let people out of prison early, and it's not been something that he's been afraid to go on. But maybe in the cold light of day, that letter, some of the attacks that we've seen from the previous on the previous government in the last few days, maybe decided to make him change his mind.
I know I'm labouring the point, but it's my particular obsession. That's also evidence of what I'm trying but failing to articulate in terms of the change in the nature of political reporting, in that a newspaper can pretend that this is all Keir Starmer's fault, as the Daily Mail has done today, but actually Rishi Sunak can't, because the facts will be presented in the House of Commons in a way that they won't be presented in the right-wing newspapers. So that's why he hasn't. Because normally you've got a front page attacking a Prime Minister, then the leader of the opposition would be all over it in PMQs. But of course it's a bogus attack, so he can't.
Yeah, and potentially...
Although Johnson would have done.
Potentially, yeah. But, there were a few things that I said sort of last week. I thought that this, winter fuel was going to be one of the four things I think Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives will continue to bash Labour over the head with in the next sort of 4 weeks, alongside unions. That was another potential topic that he could have gone on. Unions, pay rises, the TUC conference. Farming definitely didn't come up on my list. So I'll hold my hands up there and say...
On this occasion, you can be forgiven for that. That doesn't count as a miss.
Yeah, I don't think that will count.
A swing and a miss.
But yes, look, I think that Rishi Sunak is on his way out. He's on his way back to the backbenches, and he's thinking about his constituents and thinking, you know what, why not? Two questions on farming.
Do you think he'll stay on the backbenches for the next 4 years?
Hard to say if he gets a better offer.
Yeah.
People will say and point to his sense of duty as a Prime Minister, the fact that he is still technically acting leader of the Conservative Party, while all of his successors scrap like rats in a sack about who they want to replace him. He is still standing up day in, day out at Prime Minister's questions, attempting to try and land a few blows on the Prime Minister. One might argue from this session, not trying hugely hard, but is still there. And people close to him will say, look, he's got a sense of duty. He will do the right thing for the party. He'll do the right thing for his constituents. But, we know from previous that many former Prime Ministers do not tend to stick around that well, whether it's Liz Truss, booted out by the electorate, whether it's David Cameron, who decides that he actually wants to go and do something very different. George Osborne as well.
Indeed. Something I've noticed, and it may, I know I sometimes seem to be shamelessly promoting my book, but this is pertinent to the title of my book. He's using the phrase broken a lot. In that one PMQs, the prison system was broken by the previous government. The NHS was broken by the previous government. That probably will overtake the £22 billion rhetorically. When it comes to having to justify the difficult decisions he keeps talking about.
Yep.
The notion that the last lot broke everything becomes very pertinent and potentially quite effective.
It does, and fix the foundations. That's Keir Starmer's new slogan as well, slapped on the front of a podium outside Number 10 just a couple of weeks ago when he made that gloomy Rose Garden speech. The problem with obviously talking about the country being broken is that you've then got to fix it, mate. You've then got this really unenviable task of coming in and saying, once we have got got under the bonnet. We have the solutions to try and do that. And, people I don't think are going to want to wait too long before they start looking and going, okay, you have said how terrible it is, but we voted for change. You promised us change. That was the buzzword of his in the election, wasn't it? Day in, day out. He was shouting change, and, people with posters at every single rally. So he's got to at some point come forward with some of the potential solutions to fix these problems. And I don't think he has too long before people start crying out for those solutions to fix what he calls broken Britain.
I want to see improvements everywhere from prisons to hospitals.
And give people a little bit of hope as well. At the moment, the government talking about the upcoming budget are not doing, I think, a good enough job to talk about the potential for growth and the potential to grow the economy. And, we're expecting this workers' rights package at some point to come up again. But I think the government and the Treasury and the Business Department can do more to talk about what Labour did talk about quite a lot in the election campaign. The number one mission, Keir Starmer's government, grow the economy, get people back on track. I don't think he's been talking enough about this. I don't think they've been making the case for positivity, for hope, and to give people something a little bit to look forward to. But it's all part of this narrative that Keir Starmer's trying to weave about the previous government.
When you say this is his last PMQs, do you mean his last ever?
Will that be Rishi Sunak's last PMQs ever?
Do we not come back from conference with a new leader or not?
No, there is I think there is, so that it will be come down to from 4 to 2 after party conference. I forget which date exactly it is, but the MPs will whittle it down one further time to 2. So I think there may be one further Prime Minister's questions, I think, for Rishi Sunak beforehand. And then, like I say, we will get a new leader. I think it's not till November we get a new leader. So if my maths is right, there should be a couple in October after conference.
So Mel Stride was defenestrated yesterday.
The Mel Menton was not with him.
Who is likely to benefit from his votes?
Obviously, he's slightly more on the left of the Conservative Party in terms of that spectrum. So I imagine those votes are going to go to Cleverly and probably a little bit to Tugendhat as well.
Cleverly is still perceived, well, I suppose being to the left of Kemi Badenoch is almost impossible not to be, but he is still perceived, and Jenrick is, as someone said recently, I think he'd do anything. He'd sacrifice a kitten in Westminster Hall if he thought there was a percentage point in it.
I couldn't disagree with that.
Not big on substance or
Analysis.
integrity, but so Cleverly is still perceived as being towards the centre.
Yeah, I think so. I think Cleverly is probably the most centrist of those candidates. There was
so a Cleverly Jenrick face-off at the end.
Kemi's probably not going to be doing. I think she'll be disappointed by the results yesterday. Not putting on a few votes, but not as many as potentially she needed to retain.
Right.
Jenrick's still out in front. So yes, it really does depend on it exactly how they do.
And then you'd think his votes would go in a similar direction to Stride's when he gets.
Well, it benefits people like Cleverly, right? Because if you think Tom Tugendhat's going to get knocked out, and you think he will get all of those votes, and unlikely some of them going to Pretty and to Jenrick, then it's all about that maths of where those go next. But we're going into this conference season beauty parade where the four of them will face off against each other, and I think we know that the Tory members themselves are more likely to back a right of centre candidate. So people like Robert Jenrick, people like Kemi Badenoch, they are going to be the people that they want to see in that final. I think MPs will probably be more keen to see someone like Cleverly or Tugendhat get into that final to at least give the members a little bit more of a chance. There's always the chance that we could end up with a Jenrick Kemi final. It could happen. It depends on the numbers of the MPs and which way they go.
Watch this space. Great stuff. Thank you, Natasha. Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor, providing acute analysis of a whole variety of political hot potatoes.